From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin tonight with the aftermath of war in the Persian Gulf. The very enthusiastic welcome home for the troops, which means different things to different Americans. How much is still unresolved in the Gulf? Many Americans now believe the U.S. did not accomplish all it set out to do, and as we'll see tonight, post-war Kuwait is no emerging democracy. On this broadcast tonight, we'll also report on why almost half the soldiers still in the Gulf are reserves, not regular military, and what a soldier wounded in action can expect in the future from the government which sent him to fight. Today in New York, another homecoming. Here's ABC's Jeff Greenfield.
It wasn't the first parade to welcome the men and women of Operation Desert Storm. It wasn't the last, but it was almost certainly the biggest. The mix of pride, satisfaction, and relief helped turn this most contentious, cynical of cities into small-town USA. And the things people love to hate about New York seemed almost lovable today. Is New York too crowded? Not today. Too noisy? Not today. Too dirty? Not today.
This is really showing what New York is all about.
Whether it was a renewed sense of national self-esteem, or the brilliant June weather, or the simple love of a big party, more than 1 million spectators turned out to cheer more than 24,000 marchers. The New York Stock Exchange, normally a den of feverish commerce, paused for a moment of silence and a moment of song, led by a local hero born and bred in the Bronx. The sentiment was not unanimous. At last night's ecumenical service, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and Desert Storm Commander Norman Schwarzkopf were interrupted by protests. And the parade itself served as an unhappy reminder of New York's current obsession, money. Victory parades go back thousands of years to the Roman days of bread and circuses to feed and to please the masses. Of course, in New York in 1991, there is no bread to pay for these circuses. Faced with a $3.5 billion deficit, the city, for the first time in history, turned to private funds. $500,000 came from the Kuwaiti government. Millions more came from private companies and individuals. After the parade ends, after the ribbons and banners are put away, the shadows over Desert Storm will remain. Saddam Hussein still in power, the Kurds in danger, uncounted thousands of innocents dead. And maybe those very concerns lent a sense of urgency to today's celebration. When heroes are marching down the streets, no one has to worry about what is waiting around the next corner. Jeff Greenfield, ABC News, New York.
There were no celebrations today for the thousands of American servicemen and women who are still in the Persian Gulf. A particular hardship for members of the National Guard and the reserves who've been away from their full-time jobs for months. Why are so many of them still on active duty? Here's our Pentagon correspondent, Bob Zelnick.
Of the 65,000 U.S. troops still in the Persian Gulf, 28,000 are reservists. Most of these civilian soldiers left jobs and families to serve during the crisis. Many of their families argue that the reserve should come home before the full-time soldiers. Joyce Birch's grandson is still stationed with his reserve support unit in Saudi Arabia.
What really bothers me is that the regular Army has come home and the reserves are still there.
The Pentagon's answer is that most reserves are trained to perform special support duties and are not interchangeable with active duty units that are mainly trained to fight. For example, 97% of the military's civil affairs units are reserves. Some of them are still advising the government of Kuwait. 71% of the military police units and 93% of the cargo handlers are reservists. The Pentagon notes that the aftermath of the Gulf War is exactly the sort of situation the reserves are paid to prepare for. The Pentagon acknowledges a few instances where regular units have been brought home before reserve units with similar jobs. Nearly all reserve units still in the Gulf now have received estimated departure dates, most during July and August, some as late as October. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
Remind you of a statistic to this war. 357 American servicemen were wounded. And you will find among veterans of other American wars those who say that when cheering, such as we heard in New York today, fades away, America's commitment to its veterans will tend to fade as well. Here's ABC's Dennis Trout.
Paratrooper Don Beament lost an arm and a leg in an accidental explosion in Saudi Arabia. He is not bitter.
You can still do, everything you could do before, or you can try to. You might just be a little bit slower.
Right now, Beament gets all the care he needs at Walter Reed Hospital. But what happens afterwards, when he is out on his own? These are the leaders of the Disabled Veterans of America, most of them crippled in earlier wars. And they say Don Beament has reason to worry.
People tend to forget. Bureaucracy tend to forget once you have given all that you can give.
The Veterans Administration has been gradually cutting back on medical benefits that veterans have enjoyed for years. Today, veterans needing operations for non-life-threatening conditions often must wait as long as 9 months because the government will not hire more surgeons. Elective surgery for non-war-related conditions, such as hernia repairs, is provided only in a few facilities. Most veterans now must pay $2 each for prescriptions which used to be free. And the government has also stopped sending vans to take disabled veterans to and from the hospital. So private veterans groups have started their own service at a cost of more than $3 million. The Bush administration argues that, despite the cuts, veterans still get the care they deserve.
There's no agency, department of government that will ever tell you they've got enough money. We have to specialize more and more and target those veterans who logically need our services the most.
But the disabled veterans are lobbying to get the cuts restored.
The warriors and the problems that they bring home represent a continuation of the cost of war, and we're not going to let them forget that.
The question is, with the need to cut the federal budget, can anyone guarantee that injured veterans such as Don Beament will get the lifetime of care that they need? Dennis Trout, ABC News, Washington.
We'll continue in a moment how little has changed in Kuwait since the liberation. Later on the broadcast, an active volcano in the Philippines and a huge American air base evacuated. And finally this evening, paying the toll without tying up the traffic.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by AT&T.